There are 168 hours in a week. We go to church for 1 hour. What about the other 167?
Cue this podcast. We're here to bring the church to you the rest of the week. I'm David Vogel, the Director of Communication here at Central Community Church.
I'm Corey Brodel, the Director of Community. We've been to the 1 hour in church. Now welcome to the other 167.
We are here today with Pastor George Skramstad, and I know many of us at the church are very familiar with his face and with his music. He was your face. Yes, he was here at the church from 86 to 93, correct?
Right.
Then you left for a short 20 years to go down to Oklahoma City.
Short.
Yes.
And then you rejoined us in 2013.
Yes.
And you have been our worship pastor here ever since.
Yes.
Yeah.
Been working with what they call the classic, which is more of a blended worship. It's really not classic,
But we have the orchestra, so.
but yes, we have the orchestra. That makes it classic.
Exactly.
And the choir.
And the choir, right.
So today we're talking about worship, and some of us, me included, consider the music part the worship. And I'll just have to say, this last Sunday, I thought the worship was incredible. I know I personally felt the Spirit move, and I've heard other people just say that they felt the Spirit move. But the question is the music worship, or what exactly is worship?
That's an interesting question, Corey. Worship is really a verb. And there's a book called Worship is a Verb, I remember, by Alan Bohr. And it was very crucial in my coming into the worship area. And that worship is an action. It's more than calling it this is what it is, but it is an attitude of the heart. It is a bringing of ourselves to recognize who and what God is and what He has for us. So when we come to worship, we become worshipers, and the worshiping begins to happen. And we worship through music. We worship through prayers. We worship through the reading of Scripture, through the homily, through the sermon, through the sacraments, Holy Communion, baptism, all of these things, and even through the sermon.
Yeah.
The sermon is no different in worship than the music, because it's one person's gift to God by taking the word and disseminating it through understanding to the people. So the sermon is, for instance, Pastor Bob's act of worship.
Oh, yeah.
The choir sings, that's their act of worship. The band plays, the worship team sings, that's worship. And then every person who comes to church becomes a worshiper, and they become involved in the process.
Yeah. I like thinking about that because the worship as a verb, because we always say we're going to go have worship, and that makes it very much a noun. It's something that you have, but you don't say we're going to go have run. You can't. If run is a verb. It's not
Exactly.
So that puts it in a completely different frame of mind, which is it's a way to look at it that we don't always think about.
Yeah, worship is really the act of giving ourselves through our praise, through our thanksgiving, through the wonderment that He brings into our world. You look at a newborn baby and you say, how can this be? That's God.
Yeah.
And I remember Max, when we had our grandchild here almost 2 years ago, and Max said, I keep looking at Skylar and I keep crying. And I said, Max, do you know, why are you crying? And he said, I don't know, I just cry. And I said, well, you're looking into the face of God.
Yeah. That's right.
That's wonderment.
Yeah.
And that's what worship should be to us, understanding to some degree the wonder of God and His creation, the gift of the Savior to us. And so we come to church basically prepared to give an outpouring of ourselves, of our minds, our thoughts, our hopes, our dreams, carrying in our burdens, the desires of our heart, into a place where we begin to praise and worship God, and we begin to let Him work in us the miracle that He wants to work through us and in us in that service. And then that becomes part of that worship event. And from there, then we take it as we depart then to serve.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And out of that same abundant sense of God's presence in us, we leave so that we can serve and be the servants and the carriers and the bearer of the good news.
Which is ultimately taking the worship outside of the church building and worshiping in the world, right?
Exactly. If you're a teacher, you worship in the classroom.
Yeah.
And it's hard to worship in the classroom when you have all these little wee ones pulling and tugging. It's hard to be a worshiper when you're a mother at home or a father and you're having to work with your children and you're trying to discipline and care and
Yes,
feed
I
and
can
bathe
relate.
and all those things. It's hard to worship God in the middle of that.
Yeah.
And yet Brother Lawrence, for some 20 years, all he did was stay in the kitchen and he did the pans for the friary or whatever it was. And he finally said, this is what God has called me to do. So that became his service.
Wow.
And he worshiped through the
Wow.
pots and pans. And there's a whole book on that. So we are giving worth to God, and so we become his advertisements.
Yeah.
And through worship, it helps us that when we leave, we can become his advertisements because we have a new concept of God. Every week, we should have a new infusion of his Spirit that we can take with us and live that way. So we can't outdo ourselves in giving God.
And I think, talking to you earlier, the root of worship is, what is the root of the word worship? It's giving worth to the Almighty, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And that's what you're saying is giving it all back.
Give worth to who worth is due. And in this world, we are all built on hero worship.
Yeah.
Everything we do, whether it's sports, it's music, or whatever, the people who make the big bucks, the people that we emulate, the people we want to be like, we do a great deal with hero worship here in America. Our whole system is based on that. And for the Christian, however, it's a different hero.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a totally different hero. And unfortunately, even in the Christian world, we have our Christian heroes.
Yeah.
And they're good. And we have the apostles, and we have the Apostle Paul. He was a hero. We have lots of biblical heroes. But the real hero is Jesus Christ and the Trinity God, who, and through his power and through his creative processes and through the gift of the Spirit, we then, those are the real heroes.
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget who we're worshiping.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about just the busyness of this world. And like I'm a mom of 3. I also work here at the church. So on Sunday, when I'm coming in, I've got to put my mind ready to worship, right? Tell me, how do you prepare for worship?
Sabbath is, I think we have forgotten. God on the 7th day rested.
Yeah.
And if God has to rest, should not we?
Yeah.
We ask this question. And Marva Dawn has written a book called Keeping the Sabbath Holy, WHOLLY, and which is a double meaning.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the word holy means we're whole. We are complete. And keeping the Sabbath holy is really something that we have lost. In my early years, and that's how old I am, because I remember when on Sundays hardly any stores were open.
Yeah.
And so we have very few now that aren't open on Sunday, 2 or 3.
And we gripe
Yeah,
about
we're-
them when they're not
Yes.
open.
Yes, yes, we do, because they're addictive.
Yes.
We won't name them.
But we're thinking the same one.
But anyway, she wrote this book, and the rest that has to come. And even during every day, we need a time of rest. That's why we have nighttime and daytime, and we have rest periods. But in a busy world like we have, how do we as a family learn to keep the Sabbath holy? And for me, it begins at sundown on Saturday night. I like to think of it in the Hebrew tradition where at sundown, the Sabbath begins. And you have everything done in your house. You prepare enough ahead that even you don't have to prepare food. You have to just pull it out of the refrigerator, so to speak. Or you already have it planned so that you know, so that Sunday is not a stressful day. And Sabbath basically is a fun day. When I grew up, my family had more people in the house than ever on Sunday. If a new family came to church, come home to dinner with us. And we had a blast.
Yeah.
I can tell you stories, and we got into trouble as well. But anyway,
I'm shocked.
it was, I ruined a new pair of shoes on one of those Sundays, and it was not a fun day. But anyway, how can we make Sundays a day that people look forward to,
Yeah.
rather than a day that we don't want to get out of bed? I don't want to go. I am not having. And I think that's something that families need to work towards. Set out the clothes the night before. And at sundown, hardly have any activities on Saturday night. I try rarely to have something on a Saturday night, because I like to keep that open so that I can study. I can just set aside and begin to pray for the people that I attempt to lead on a Sunday morning, praying for individuals, praying for myself. God, how is my soul tonight?
Yeah.
What is it that I need to have for tomorrow? Fill me up so that I have the words, so that I have the joy, so that I have the Spirit within me to do what needs to be done. And that's a time of confession. It's a time of leaning in and beginning. And as the sun goes down, it's great to watch it set sometimes, or to watch it come up. And my alarm is set for 4 o'clock on Sunday morning. And so that when I wake up, I am ready. I am there, ready to go. I know what clothes I'm going to wear, and if kids can do that, prep's made for Sunday, and there's an anticipation for the day.
Yeah.
This is the day we go to show God how much we love Him. We have prepared, we've decided what our offering is going to be. All of these things are taken care of, so that when we get up, and we get up in plenty of time, and go in an attitude of prayer and expectation that God is going to show up in all of our lives.
I think that is such a great reminder because, for myself included, church is it's someplace I have to go. It's checking it off my list, and then we go have lunch. But to put the thoughtfulness into it and the anticipation, Sunday mornings, I love getting here early because as I'm driving east towards the church, I'm seeing the sun come up. I'm listening to a public radio station that's playing old church music, so that puts my heart kind of in the right spot. And it just, walking through the doors with my heart prepared, just excited about what happens, it makes the service and the worship so much more meaningful. And I think everything you just said is such a great reminder to do that and the importance of it.
Yeah, it's a real attitude of the heart, and that grateful heart. And if kids see that, if kids grow up with that, they will continue that process. They'll continue to make Sundays their special day. But if mom and dads are not living in that spirit, the kids will not perpetuate their Sunday worship and that day of being. And I remember I grew up in Idaho, and it was a church of farmers, And there was one farmer that, starting in about June, we didn't see him until almost Christmas. But every other farmer took Sunday off, came to church. They still had to get up early to milk the cows.
Right.
You know, that those girls don't wait. But anyway, where I'm going here is that he was the most unhappy Christian that I have been aware of. I remember his face, and it showed no signs of joy, and everything was hard for him. But I really believe it was because his work and the harvest and all that he was doing. He said, well, I'm in harvest. Well, so were they.
Yeah.
But it was not a priority for them.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that to intentionally engage in worship is another thing that has to be. We can sit in the pew and we can watch.
Right.
Or we can engage.
Yep.
And that is the hardest thing because we are a culture of watchers, of voyeurs.
Yep.
Sports,
Yep.
concerts, everything in our world is a look and see, the television before us, and we don't have to engage, and we can check in or out. And how people view us in worship may be the difference between them getting it and not getting it. And we never know who's watching us and who is. I remember sitting in my little church as a kid, and I remember Sister Waldron, we called her, and I remember her hands holding the hymn book and her singing in her flouncy. She had those skirts in those days. They had all the stuff, the taffeta underneath them, so they went way out.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm old, so I remember that. And she was in her 70s, and she was dressing like a teenager. But I'll tell you, she got into worship. And here was this little old grandma. And to this day, I see her form. I see the sincerity within her heart. And so the other thing is that when we come here, we're here to engage. Kierkegaard, a great theologian, put this synopsis of what worship is all about. The pastors, the choir, the orchestra, the worship teams, the bands, the soloists, anybody that's up front, basically they're the prompters. We become the prompters. So when you come to church, you don't come to see us. That's not really what we do. All we're doing is prompting the congregation. The congregation then becomes the actors. They become the focal point. The people in the congregation are where God is moving and working most. And of course, we've got it wrong. We think, it's the people up on the platform and I hate to call it the stage because then it becomes performance.
Right.
But, it's worship. And then God becomes the audience. So if God's the audience, I better be involved. Because if I'm a player out on that team, he's watching.
Right.
And I'm in the congregation team. And that means get involved. And that has always been a beautiful thing for me to see.
Yeah.
Well, those are some really powerful reminders of what we need to be doing. And the stories you shared of the farmer and and by very strong contrast, the old woman in your church, of how they demonstrated the joy of their life, or the lack of joy, through their worship, and how impactful being involved and participating in worship is. So thank you, Pastor George, for coming and talking to us today. This has been encouraging and enlightening.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, Pastor George, I have, so many takeaways from this. So many, in the sanctuary, what my worship looks like and who I'm worshiping to. But it's going to start for me that Saturday before and preparing my heart. And I love what you said, that we have to check our soul. we have to check our soul. So I'm going to be sure to do that on my Saturdays now. I'm going to get some good rest. I'm going to be prepared, lay out my kids' clothes. My family's going to know, like, we're going to start celebrating the Sabbath. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Thank you for
Pastor
sharing.
George.
Love
For
the
asking.
stories, and thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to 167. Please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening from.
And to keep up with everything at Central Community Church, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to watch us record this podcast live, find us on YouTube.
We think the 167 hours between church services are so important, and we hope you'll share this episode with your friends. Join us next week.